A warm welcome to everybody. My name is Kerry Lane. I'm the project investigator for this year's NEH grant. On behalf of my co-PI, Dr. Stephen Dahlke, we want to welcome you today, our students, especially our dance students, guests, and our Holocaust survivors. I also want to say thank you, as always, to Dr. Arthur Flug and Marissa Berman for your support and assistance, and also to Phil Roncaroni and Ray Perez for your technical expertise and making sure these events go off without a hitch. So thank you so much. This is our fourth colloquium this year. Our presenters, visiting scholars, and cohort of students and faculty have examined a wide range of topics related to and influencing cultural and artistic responses to genocide. These include the Holocaust itself, Rwanda, Bosnia, the African American experience, the Parsley Massacre on the Haitian-Dominican border, empathy and understanding, graphic depictions of genocide, documenting and archiving the art of genocide, poetry in response to the art of genocide, the literature of destruction, and of course QCC students' own cultural and artistic responses to genocide, which will be exhibited here at the Holocaust Center and at the Queens Performing Arts Center on April 16, 2015. Today, we will examine disability, not only in its relation to the Holocaust and to discrimination, but also in terms of cultural and artistic response. Dance, disability, and the Holocaust, the title of today's event, may first seem like three incongruous terms, but as we will learn today, they are inexorably linked. To further our collective understanding and to promote this discussion, we are honored to welcome Ms. Heidi Latsky, founder, artistic director, and choreographer of Heidi Latsky Dance, whose professional mission is to use dance to uphold rather than fear embodied differences. As part of today's program, Ms. Latsky will discuss her mission through the Gimp project, which integrates and is inclusive of dancers with disabilities. We also welcome Mr. Jaron Herman, dancer, writer, and member of Heidi Latsky Dance, who will be a panelist for today's discussion and who will honor us with a performance. And Dr. Amy Traver of the Department of Social Sciences here at QCC, who will facilitate today's discussion and contextualize Ms. Latsky's work and societal attitudes towards the disabled through historical and sociological frameworks. As Ms. Latsky, Mr. Herman, and Dr. Traver will articulate, achieving cultural and perceptual change through the creativity and expression of dance is an incredibly powerful endeavor, and one which not only embodies the theme for today, but the theme for the entire grant. So I present to you Dance, Disability, and the Holocaust, and please give a warm welcome to Dr. Amy Traver, your host for today.
Thank you. Before I begin, I have my own series of acknowledgments and thank yous. First, I'd like to thank Professor Kerry Lane for including me in this year's NEH-sponsored colloquia series, Testimony Across the Disciplines, Cultural and Artistic Responses to Genocide. I'd also like to acknowledge Professor Susan Jacobowitz, Professor Emily Berry, who I saw before, Professor Aviva Geismar, Dr. Arthur Flug, and Ms. Marissa Berman for their support for today's event. Thanks are also due to all the QCC students who are here instead of at lunch. Thank you. And to Ms. Heidi Latsky and Mr. Jaron Herman for sharing their art with us. Finally, I'd like to recognize and point all of you in the direction of the tremendous online resources of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, which helped to inform my comments here today. So to begin, on January 30th, 1933, in the aftermath of World War I and in the midst of a worldwide economic depression, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. His National Socialist or Nazi Party quickly rose to absolute power, dismantling Germany's parliamentary democracy and establishing a totalitarian government. Yet in the words of Hitler himself, anyone who interprets National Socialism as merely a political movement knows nothing about it. It is more than a religion. It is the determination to create the new man. It is the determination to create the new man. Let's let that sink in for a few minutes. What did Hitler mean by this? And from where did this determination arise? What were the ideological implications of this singular construction of the new man, and what actions did it provoke? Upon taking control of Germany, Hitler also assumed control of the nation's narrative. According to his Nazi party, Germany's social and economic hardships could be blamed on its weakened population, when overburdened by the useless eaters who took readily from but added nothing to the German state. Today's event will focus on the people the Nazis first targeted for extermination in their efforts to create the new man, the people that inspired the phrase useless eaters, people with disabilities. To start us off, I'll begin with brief comments on the Nazi efforts to exterminate people with disabilities from Germany and German annexed territories. I'll also connect these efforts to ideas and activities from America's history. The bulk of our time together, however, will be spent in conversation with Heidi Latsky and Jaron Herman of Heidi Latsky Dance. While past events in this colloquia series have examined how cultural products, be they theatrical performances occurring inside concentration camps, or graphic novels depicting life during and after genocide, can help us to endure and document mass murder, this event asks you to consider how cultural production, specifically how dance, can help us to better understand the construction and the experiences of the othered, the targets of genocide. So not long after Adolf Hitler took office, his government initiated policies that reflected the party's determination to create the new man. These policies aimed to develop a biologically pure Germany, an Aryan master race, through the extermination of people considered genetically defective and socially burdensome. The first of these policies was established on July 14, 1933, as a law for the prevention of progeny with hereditary diseases. This law mandated the sterilization of all persons suffering from supposedly hereditary diseases like mental illness, retardation, epilepsy, blindness, deafness, and physical deformity. Historians estimate that approximately 300,000 to 400,000 people with disabilities were sterilized under the law, and that several thousand people with disabilities died as a result of these sterilization surgeries. While the law for the prevention of progeny with hereditary diseases focused on eradicating people with disabilities from Germany's future, it was eventually followed by efforts to eradicate people with disabilities from what was then Germany's present. In October of 1939, Hitler empowered German physicians with the right to euthanize, or to grant a mercy death to, any patients considered incurable according to the best available human judgment of their state of health. Infants, children, and adolescents with disabilities were the primary victims of this law, and most were put to death via forced starvation, via poisoning, and via lethal injection. German physicians' right to euthanize was later extended and institutionalized in the Nazi regime's Operation T4 program. Between 1940 and 1941, adults with disabilities living in government and church-run institutions in Germany and German annexed territories were put to mercy death with poison gas. Eventually, these efforts evolved into the murder of concentration camp inmates who were deemed similarly disabled. Relatively conservative estimates indicate that 5,000 German infants, children, and adolescents with disabilities were murdered under the right to euthanize, and that approximately 275,000 adults with disabilities perished under T4 in its various manifestations. While couched in the language of mercy, the right to euthanize children, adolescents, and adults with disabilities was, in fact, merciless. Building on the state's sterilization program, it aimed to bolster the nation's Aryan race while exterminating those deemed hereditarily unfit for Nazi society. Significantly, it is in the defining of people with disabilities as hereditarily unfit that we see both the roots and the breadth of Nazi ideology in action. For example, the desire to eradicate disability from society was not unique to the Nazi regime. Rather, this desire reflected the prominent and predominant scientific and medical theories of the time. These theories, which drew on the work of American eugenicists, advocated for the improvement of man and society through the promotion of positive genetic traits and the annihilation of negative genetic traits. In fact, before Nazi Germany, the United States led the world in the forced sterilization of individuals with disabilities, individuals with negative genetic traits, and it did so via similar claims to social and economic betterment. In addition, the organized efforts to rid people with disabilities from Germany and German annexed territories served as a model for the mass murder of other groups from the same region. You might recognize that one of the primary killing methods of euthanasia, poison gas, was eventually used by the Nazi Party in their Holocaust of European Jews. Likewise, the Nazi Party's characterization of people with disabilities as useless eaters did more than lay the foundation for the murder of people with disabilities. It also provided a template for how additional groups would be othered, declared similarly unfit for society, and exterminated. At this time, I'd like to transition to our conversation with Heidi Latsky and Jaron Herman of Heidi Latsky Dance. We've invited Heidi and Jaron here today because of their work with what they call the Gimp project, which, in line with the larger mission of Heidi Latsky Dance, uses dance to uphold and celebrate embodied differences. It is my hope that our conversation with Heidi and Jaron will help you to see dance as a means to convey the experiences of the other, as an agent of perceptual change around constructions of the other, and ultimately as a medium through which we can celebrate the collective diversity of men and women, plural. So Heidi and Jaron, welcome to Queensborough Community College, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jaron. I'm Heidi Latsky, and what you just saw was an actual excerpt from a piece called Somewhere, which we are about to perform actually in Chicago in a week and a half. As Amy was saying, I just want you to read you this because, one of the difficult things about working with disability now, and I've had a company since 2001, but I started working with people with disabilities in 2006. And what I found was that there's so much misunderstanding about what the work that we are doing and also what it means to have people with disabilities in your company. So the first assumption is what? Do you know? Can you think? If I say to a presenter, well, my company has some people with disabilities in the company, what do you think, what's the first image that comes to your head? Anybody? Wheelchair. And in my first company, nobody was a wheelchair user. And so that kind of was a signal to me that there were a lot of misperceptions, a lot. So when Amy was speaking before about suffering with disabilities, that's one of the things that has been written about us. Oh, this company, has mixed the people with disabilities, they suffer from disabilities or they're overcoming disabilities. And my dancers respond, who's suffering, right? None of us are suffering. We're having a great time. So our mission has not only been, and I wrote this down because it keeps changing, dedicated to celebrating the artistic expression of difference through dance, but we have a broader mission, which is becoming even more important to all of us, to encourage a shift in perception of where beauty and virtuosity reside, and perhaps even to redefine those concepts for people, because they do get redefined through experience. So another thing, before we go into, I'm going to show you some video. If you noticed for his solo, there were two versions of Somewhere Over the Rainbow. And in 2006, I met this woman, Lisa Bufano, who is a bilateral amputee, and she commissioned me to help her make a solo. And I wanted to use Somewhere Over the Rainbow, a version of it for this piece, which was 25 minutes long, and she refused. And she said to me, we had a big fight actually, and she said, I don't want the audience to feel that I'm thinking somewhere over the rainbow I would have another body. I could have another body. I could be a different person. And she was really worried that that was what the audience was going to get. We took Somewhere Over the Rainbow out of her solo. You were going to see that solo because it changed my life. Lisa became my muse. I saw in her a fierceness, a passion, and like an availability and a vulnerability that I really do love to see in dancers. And so many trained dancers, it gets like knocked out of them because they're so busy trying to get their leg high. I did that too. Get the technique just right, that we lose sometimes our own voice. And maybe we're afraid to take a risk. Well, she taught me that these are the kind of dancers I really want to work with. And so I'm going to show you the solo, an excerpt of this 25-minute solo, and then it's going to go right into a promotional trailer we made for Gimp, which was the second piece in the Gimp project, which I can talk about more later. But in connection to Geron's solo, it wasn't until a couple years ago that I decided to take Somewhere Over the Rainbow on again, because I didn't have that opportunity in 2006. And so our new piece, Somewhere, has 10 different versions of the song, very, very different versions, like you saw 2 of them. And hopefully it does not do what Lisa was afraid it was going to do, but the actual reverse, that it's more of a celebration of uniqueness. So I'm going to show you now these 2 videos, and then we can speak.
I've just got to tell you, I've been watching you. We've been watching you for the last 20, 25 minutes or so. Now, I don't know about them, but I think you're beautiful. I think you're really beautiful. Absolutely stunning. I thought that this was going to be strange. I thought that you were going to be weird. But you're not. It's like you're standing at the edge of the cliff. It's like you're at the edge of the diving board and then you just jump right off. It's just incredible. I mean, this has changed me. This has really moved me. It's been an honor and a privilege to have the time and space to stop and really look at you, to really see you. bar.
So I think you'll agree with me that this is some powerful stuff and an interesting way for us to start thinking about some of the themes that we see recurring across history in many different social and cultural contexts, and specifically themes around diversity, embodied diversity in particular. So the way that we've structured the rest of our time here together is that I have a few questions for Heidi and Jaron that will connect the work that they're doing here today to some of the themes that we discussed in my beginning comments. And then I'm going to invite all of you to react, reflect, ask questions, connect what we're talking about to some of your own experiences or your own artistic forms, because that's equally as interesting. Okay? So Heidi, you've told us a bit about, visually and also through your comments, the company's Gimp project. One of the things that strikes me, and I think you sort of referenced in your mention of the language of suffering, is the importance of language. And the way that the Nazis used the language of useless eaters was significantly profound for people with disabilities and for the groups that perished after them. So I wonder why you chose to name your project the Gimp Project, because Gimp is a word that many of you might know is often colloquially used in a negative context to refer to people with disabilities. So if you could tell us a little bit about that decision.
Okay. I'll give it the backstory is that Lawrence, who is the gentleman who was speaking in the video, and just so that you know that speech was based on what people said to us after our shows. It was put in later on in the life of Gimp, where we'd have these post-performance talkbacks, because we felt that was really important. And everyone would stay. People really wanted to have a forum to ask questions, and so a lot of what he was saying was based on that. He is a political activist. He actually lives in DC right now and works for the government, and he's a media guy. And every day when we were rehearsing, he would come into rehearsal with a different t-shirt. Like one said, "Get ready to stumble." And then he came in, there was a t-shirt that said, "If you keep staring, I might just do a trick." And they were funny. And then he said, he called it like a preemptive strike. And then he came in one day and he had a t-shirt, "Gimp." And I remarked, I said, "Why are you wearing that t-shirt?" And again, he said, "It's a preemptive strike. I'm owning the word." It's kind of like me saying, because he says, "I know I walk funny, and people look at me." You saw him walk in the video. One of the reasons why I created this piece called Two Men Walking was it was the first piece I made for him, and I wanted the audience to really look at his walk and to get a really great, like a certain amount of time to get used to it, but also to see how actually beautiful. It's a beautiful walk because his gait has so much rhythm in it. So he said that by wearing shirts like this, he was telling anyone who was looking at him that he knows that he walks funny. And so initially the work was called From the Limb. And this is a nice modern dance company making a poetic piece called From the Limb. And we started thinking, could we call it Gimp? Because our mission, even then, half the cast were physically disabled and half the cast were not. They were from my company that I've had since 2001. And we really wanted people to come see the work. And I thought, no one wants to come see Heidi Latsky dance. It's just, I thought maybe I should get my name out of there and promote this as something a lot more like to get people intrigued. And From the Limb, while that was, I thought, a beautifully poetic name, it suited the piece at that moment in time when we were considering Gimp, but it also wasn't that provocative. So I told the company that if the piece got edgier, I would change the name. And of course, it got edgier. We worked on that. And we decided to call it Gimp. And when we decided to call it Gimp, we looked at all the different definitions of Gimp. Did you notice the definitions on the video? So when I saw what Gimp really meant, you know, fighting spirit and vigor, interwoven fabric. So I got these aerialists who lived in Florida, and I worked remotely with them because she was born without legs. She's become quite a celebrity these days. She's got an incredible story. You should look her up. Her name is Jen Bricker. She's been in the news a lot because of her story. And she was born without legs, and she's working with the non-disabled gymnast, and the two of them made this gorgeous, well, the three of us together made a silk duet for them. So it means interwoven fabric, it means trembling with ecstasy, fighting, spirit, vigor, and then someone who walks with a limp. And that's how we came up with Gimp. When we were doing our website, we couldn't get Gimp to be our website, so we came up with the Gimp project, and it just stuck. The problem now is that Heidi Latsky Dance is the company. The Gimp project is this body of work that I've been doing with, you know, including people with disabilities. Gimp is the name of a piece. It gets very confusing, right? And that's what I was saying right at the beginning, that language has become a real issue because I've read things like, oh, Gimp is a dance company that, well, Gimp is not a dance company. Heidi Latsky Dance is the company. So you see, we're in a kind of funky space right now. And we're trying to really figure out, do we use the Gimp project anymore? You know, Gimp is a controversial word, and a lot of disability organizations have refused to come and see the work. They don't understand why we're using it. So, you know, it's a double-edged sword. That's something we're trying to figure out as we move forward.
Jaron, we'd love to hear from you and your reactions to being involved in the project generally, but also your reactions to the titling of the project would be interesting given those comments.
Yeah, actually, it's really interesting. I've been called Gimp. I've been called a Crip, and the association with the word is both troubling and also very empowering. I think that using the Gimp project as an umbrella term is accessible because, I'm gonna move this forward, is accessible actually because we have numerous pieces that fall under the category of the Gimp project, or what it means to be one of Gimp, I would think. And even right now, speaking on it, I think that the pieces that we're constructing right now, if somewhere, do fall under, was I supposed to talk about that? I don't know. I think that they do fall under this Gimp project, albeit abstractly. But for my own personal reaction to it, I was really scared to engage with the word Gimp or anything that has to do with disability. Growing up, I worked really hard to assimilate to what I call normies, and which probably encompasses most of you who are in here, those without disability. It was really important for me to detract or to separate myself from a disabled community because I thought that it would detract from my growth. And actually, I was kicked out of special schools because they thought that it would be hindering to my development if I stayed in specialized programs. So it's been kind of a psychological mind warp that I am. The word advocacy is coming up a lot more in my vocabulary, and what it means to be really proud of a defect or defunct exterior element of yourself, and to gain power from that. So I'm really taking that in stride. I still haven't gotten anywhere with it, or as much as I want to. I'm not a fully conscious human being, but I'm getting there. So
I just have to say something. You know, watching Jaron dance, he's one of the best dancers I've ever worked with. And that second part of his solo is actually the first thing he did at an audition for me. And it's him improvising. And you know, one of the things that I always look for is something extreme. I like to look for virtuosity in any dancer that I work with. And when he did that in the studio, I was like, okay, you can just do that. And I love watching that. And so what you call a defect is such an asset as a dancer.
Well, I only say it because I only use the word defect because it correlates to what Hitler said and also what others categorize, I think. So I'm using it in the terms of what the other have said about the other.
Yes.
That's up.
Smart pants. So connected to that, and that very smart connection that you're making to our comments before, I'm wondering if you both might think about the determination to create the new man and that language that was used. It was based on a singular construction of humanity, a singular construction of human value. And I'm wondering how you see efforts like the Gimp project or your work more generally as advocates or as dancers as expanding definitions of ability, expanding definitions of beauty, expanding definitions of strength.
Well, right off the bat, if you just think of the dance world, the ideal dancer is not me nor Geron. And I think that's like the first step, right? I think a lot of modern dancers value the beauty of difference, but maybe not to the extent that we have taken it. And my experience with, especially starting with Lisa and moving forward, is that it's like beauty found in unexpected places is so much more interesting and has so much more value on so many levels than a superficial beauty. And having worked with Bill T. Jones' Arnie Zane Dance Company, that's when I first actually got such a turnaround, because I really had that ideal in my head that if I could get my leg all the way up here, and I remember a dancer came up to me and said, well, you know, Heidi, if you had 1 more inch to your legs, you would never be out of work. And I remember thinking, well, gee, thanks. I can't change that. But there was this sense that and I think there still is, you see it in the ballet world, certainly, and it's very similar to what you're talking about, that partly what we do in the Gimp project is to show through movement the beauty and of each of the dancers through, you know, to shift that perception. Like when you look at Lisa in that video and you see her hands doing this, you know, if I do that, it does not look the same. To me, her hand going like that looked like a falling rose. And so sensual. But, you know, I remember my first meeting with her was to eat lunch. And it wasn't until right before I had lunch with her that I went, oh my God, she doesn't have any hands, like she has no fingers. What do? Am I gonna look at her hands? Should I not look at her hands? We're gonna be eating together. What do I do? And she made me very, very comfortable. Remember, this is my first experience with anybody with disability. I really didn't know how I was gonna act. And then to watch her, and I was really cognizant of how beautiful her hands were. And I think that's our mission, right? To show through movement, on stage, with maybe some of those ideal dancers, that there is not a big difference. It's just different. It's like, you know what I mean? It's
I agree,
like,
yeah, definitely.
It's not the same, but it's equally compelling.
Yeah.
I will share one more story. Is that okay to share a story? I don't know if I'm answering your question
No,
directly,
absolutely.
but I'll give you another example. We were in rehearsal, and I have one dancer who's a ballet dancer. She does point work, and I love point work. So I made her a solo, 2 minutes long, of fast and furious point work. Really technically challenging. And we were rehearsing that, and then I was rehearsing with Leslie, who was in the video. She has that kind of serpentine arm. And then I was rehearsing her solo. And after that rehearsal, I was walking with Leslie, and she started to cry. And she said, I don't know why I'm doing what I'm doing after watching Meredith. How can I be on the same stage with somebody who can do what she does? Meredith called me 10 minutes later, crying. I can't do what Leslie does. How I can't be vulnerable like that. She moves me to tears. I can't do that. So the two of them were having such a difficult time acknowledging their own strengths. They were very quick to acknowledge what the other person was doing that they couldn't do. And you know what? They couldn't. They were very different performers, but they had a lot to learn from each other, and that's kind of such a beautiful experience that we don't often have. Especially if you do, what was done, this idea of genocide and how you get rid of, before you have a chance to experience something that is unknown to you or unclear to you, or we tend to be afraid of it, right? Just like I was afraid of me having lunch with Lisa. What am I going to say? I was afraid the whole first year. Maybe I'll offend my dancers. Maybe I'll say something that is really, truly not a good thing to say. Do you want to say something?
Well, I definitely agree with everything you just said. In terms of language, what needs to be singular? I think that's the thing that comes out to me. It's like we're all different and we all have various characteristics, but what is the totem that we all hold together? What makes us singular in that moment, in that instance? And I think it'll behoove all of us to really think about what is singular about all of us, and what I think, and it's ideological. It's not exterior. It's not external, and that's the hardest thing, because we always have to think about in what ways do we correspond or match each other, and it's not what's physical. And I think that's the hard thing that we have to always do and think about.
So my last question for you both, and then I'll turn the tables to you. While today's event has demonstrated that dance can help us to better understand the construction of the targeted, the exterminated, the othered in society, dance has also been used to more directly depict and memorialize experiences of genocide, as in Rebecca Davis Dance Company's production of Darfur. What makes dance such an appropriate medium for the expression of something so terrible and tragic and serious? Because I think it is. I think it's appropriately powerful in a way that other mediums might not be.
Jerron and I were talking about this in the car coming here. I think it's a universal language. When dance is, I think, at its most powerful is when it resonates on a very deeply visceral level, so that people relate to it not conceptually or mentally, but actually physically and emotionally. And I think that it's embodied. And I think if we're breathing and embodying such tragedy, that the audience can relate to that on a different plane. I know that in my experience, for instance, with Somewhere, I have audience members coming up to me all the time. They just say they cry the entire piece. It's not a heavy piece. It's not like this is like a depressing piece about anything as tragic as genocide, but there's something, I think, about the music and then what's going on stage that's so physical and emotional that I think it transcends the intellect, which is where I think so that we get a personal experience of something and maybe can relate a little bit more strongly to that subject matter. Do you want to say something?
I think that's great.
So we invite all of your comments, your questions, your reactions, your reflections. Some of you are dancers. All of us move around in some ways, so we understand the medium.
I just want to start off by saying that I felt everything. Like, it gave me chills just to see, because I've never been open to something like that. I've never been open to something like this, so it's different. I never thought of, like, you know, disability children actually dancing. I never, you know, it was never something that came across my mind. It was never something that I was open into the world to. So it's like the thought to know that you even have a dance company of disability people is beautiful to me. Like, that's amazing. Because me, I don't like to judge people based off of how they are. I like to see what they like to bring, or the feeling that they can give and share with you in different ways. So it's like, I just got chills. Like, I'm still shaking off of everything you just said in the video. Like, you really opened my eyes out to a lot of things, and it definitely inspired me. It definitely did. So that's a comment for the both of you guys, seriously.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I say something? One of the big no-nos in the disability world is inspirational by default. By default. That's not what. That's not what. You can respond in a second, but Lisa, I'm not putting you down at all. I'm just trying, because I think what you're talking about, what I'm getting from you, is has great integrity, and is not what I'm talking about. But I wanted, because you said inspiration, I wanted to just bring that up as something that I learned early on, was that when Lisa taught me, actually, she said, I don't want to be inspiring because, oh, look at the girl without fingers who can brush her teeth. She would actually say that. Like, that's not what we're trying to do, right? And you obviously got it. When she did this solo at Judson Church, the very first time she performed, at the end of the show, she got a standing ovation. And she looked at my producer, Jeremy Allager, and myself, and she was very touched and said, am I getting this standing ovation because I was good or because I'm disabled? And I wouldn't have answered that. Like, there was no way. I didn't know what to say. And Jeremy, who's been involved with, you know, art and disability for so long, said both. Both. I mean, and so we have worked very, very hard to have that kind of high standard, to attain a high standard of art, so that it's never, as Lawrence would say, a pity piece or a sentimental piece, like, oh, you hear what he says in the monologue, right? I didn't expect this. You're so brave. You're so courageous, right? These are the kind of things that we're trying to get beyond. So I appreciate your comment very much. Do you want to say something else?
I understand what you mean, but I was leaning more towards her feelings, because I could tell. When I was fully looking at her, and the way she was really touching herself and really just so in sync with her own beauty. That's what really spoke to me that most, rather than, she is disabled. I mean, that also spoke to me, but I was really looking at the way she had her eyes closed, and then she was just so really in sync with herself. Like, she didn't care who was on the stage, anybody else, she just only cared about herself. That's what I was mainly trying to get forward to, but as well as the disabled, so I guess he's right when it's both, but the feeling of her loving herself was more powerful.
And beautiful comments. Thank you. And that's exactly what I was saying at the beginning, was that she changed my life. She changed my career, because her availability as a performer, and for all of you guys who are dancers, did she really love herself? I don't know. But what she did was she gave it her all. She didn't hold back. She was completely vulnerable in that moment, and she completed the task. She was doing the task fully, and that's what's so inspirational, right? That's what touches the audience.
Hi. Yeah, what I found really interesting was your dance. Honestly, I did not even know that you were disabled at all. And I didn't notice until I saw you actually sit down, because I thought that as a part of your piece, your arm being still was a part of the movement. And what really got me with the whole entire time when I was looking at you dancing was like, wow, how can he have his arm in this position the whole entire dance and not have it move or anything, and the rest of his body is like moving? And I was very like, wow, like the amount of like effort and technique or whatever you have to do that, I thought that was amazing. And then when I saw you sit down, I was like, oh my gosh, like it really surprised me. I did not even know at all. I thought it was really inspiring. That really was amazing. And I really appreciate your company. I think that what Alex was saying too, or how I feel, as well as that, I think that we're not exposed to as much out there in the dance world. And I just started dancing fairly recently. So for me to come here and to see different forms of different styles of things that are going on that's out there is really an eye-opener. That's really important to me because I love to learn. I love to see differences in styles of dance, what are people doing. And I feel like your company really touched me because one of the things that came, before I started dancing, I started dancing as a liturgical dancer for praise dancing. So I was always an emotional kind of person. I always felt very spiritual when it came to dance. But it wasn't until I took dance as a career, or I tried to take it in a certain kind of world where it's like, okay, you have to have legs, you have to have extension, you have to have this. So I've been focusing more on the technique. I felt like I haven't been able to express that aspect of the emotions that I had from before. So I feel like my mindset shifted, and I feel like everything else is just about technique, legs, height, flexibility. And I haven't felt like I felt like I haven't had my spirit back in dance since I started dancing to try to have that as a profession. But when I saw your dances, I saw your dance company, it really motivated me, it really moved me because I felt the passion and I felt every single thing that you were coming across, that you were getting out there. It really meant a lot to me. It was very inspiring, very like emotional, and I was crying because
you know what, well, you're having a moment, and I want to share with you something about technique, because when I first started dancing, I had that, oh, I love it so much, and everyone yelled at me, your ribs are out, pull your ribs in. And then I worked so hard on my technique that I lost all my passion for dancing because I was so focused on my technique. And now when I teach dance, I tell dancers all the time, bring it into your technique class. Not that you should impose a feeling on what you're doing, but if you stay just, how does this feel? Like the simple task of a plie, how does it feel? Right? To keep asking yourself. And I think breathing is really helpful that way, and just having that mindset that it's all connected. So you haven't quite lost it. You just have to find the way to connect it and to keep it part of the process, like keep it alive in your process. But thank you very much. Did you want to say?
Well, that what you just said really resonates with me because I have no business doing this, or it doesn't seem like that. And the kind of, I don't know, it's what you said about spirit and about moving in spirit, or we have this thing called front body, back body, and I think about the intentionality what Heidi gives us when she says go into your back body, and it's feeling everything. It's about everything. And so what you said is so true. Like, yes, it's about technique. Don't get it wrong. Like Heidi is disciplined, and her company, we practice and we rehearse, and we are mindful of what we're doing, but also the intentionality behind it is really important as well. It's 50-50.
I actually think too, how many of you are dancers? Yeah. I actually think too that alignment and that really fundamental technique is integral to keeping it clean, clear, and honest. So you're trying to get as efficient and as close to your center as you can be. I mean, I'm still working on that every day for myself, so that when I get on stage, I'm not imposing my emotions. They're there because of what I'm doing. I'm just doing my task. And as I do it, you know, just like as you saw Jaron, he was just doing his task. But he brings everything to it. You know, he's not holding back, but he's also not imposing. You know what I mean by that? Okay.
Additional questions, comments, reactions?
Do you have any questions about how we work? Are you curious about that? Or where we perform? Or
How are, like, I don't know, kind of like your rehearsals? Like, how do you, I guess, how do you, like, to you, to create a piece, and then to tell the dancers exactly like, okay, well, this, you know, well, this is the piece, and how does this make you feel, to get that emotion out of them? How does that, like, man, yeah, how does that?
Well, it's a very good question. I have found that it doesn't work to tell them how to feel, because then what I just said, the imposition, it comes from their head. I try to find movement, whether they're creating it themselves or I'm creating it, that when you do it, I'm getting what I want. That the movement is actually what speaks and what resonates, and what, if I feel that if I do my job right, that they will have the feeling that I want, if they're open to it. It's not that we don't talk about intention. Like, Jaron's an actor, okay? So I'll give you an example. We do a piece where he's very, very intimate with a woman in my company to another version of Over the Rainbow, and sometimes he's acting it. And I have to say to him, stop acting, just do the task. Whereas with some people, the task seems to be, they're blocked and the task isn't enough, so I have to encourage them, right? But in terms of what we've been talking about, the singular experience, so to speak, when I started my company in 2001, I was the resource. I made all the movement. And then I gave it to my dancers, and then I helped them embody it in their own way, but it was all about my movement, because that's where I was at. When I first started working with Lisa, I couldn't do that. I mean, obviously I couldn't do that. And that's why, that was another way, I think I became a much better choreographer, because all of a sudden it was like, well, wait, it's not only about the way I move, it's what can they generate? You know, so I would do things like I'd said to Lawrence, okay, now what else? I know you can walk. I see you walk, it's really beautiful, and he has really long arms. So I kept having him like really reach his arms up and say, come on. And his arm was like here, and I kept saying, come on, you can make it longer. And all of a sudden I saw these gorgeous long arms, and we played with his arms, and I got bored, and I said, okay, so now what else can you do well? And he said, I fall really well. So then I had him like fall 20 times. So now my company says, be careful what you show Heidi, because she'll use it. So I learned how then to expand my vocabulary with the unique movement qualities of each dancer that I have. That's disabled and non-disabled. I started working much more with that. That answer your question?
Yeah, that was perfect.
Okay.
Right on the nail.
I think there was another question.
Hi. My question is, I noticed that you work with the limb, I guess, basically, amputees, and I wanted to know if you worked with anybody mute, deaf, any other kind of things like that, and how do you go about that?
That we work with people with physical disabilities, but do we work with the deaf, the mute?
We have a deaf dancer in the company right now. Okay, this is my dilemma. You know, what we're trying to promote in the work is this idea of diversity and inclusion. And a couple of years ago, I lost one of my dancers, and I asked a very, very good friend of mine, Li Chaoping, who lives in Madison, and she is a very strong dancer who had a car accident, and her foot got really mangled, and her leg is like kind of, her foot actually doesn't move anymore. And I put her in Gimp, and it threw the balance off, because for Gimp, it felt very important that we were equally disabled and non-disabled, that it was a visual, that visually you could see the difference. And with Chaoping, you couldn't. We even put makeup on her foot. It was like ridiculous. But I realized that as a visual art form, with the intention that I had with Gimp especially, which was really about being watched. It's about being watched, it's about being seen, it's about being marginalized, but like saying here, this is who I am, this is who we are, and then having the audience see us like kind of do, even if we did these little fashion show poses, and then we would go into everybody's world, so everybody had a chance to kind of be vulnerable and expose who they really were. That was the premise. So for Gimp, that was very important. And then it's not as important now. So now I have Alexandria, who's deaf. I do incorporate sign language into her solo, but it's what she calls gibberish, because we translated Somewhere Over the Rainbow into American Sign Language, and then we accumulated the song. And so it's kind of nonsensical in a way. It doesn't really make any sense, but it's using her physicality and how beautiful that is to create this solo. So in a sense, I have limited the kind of dancers that I use in this company because of the impact we're trying to have. You know, this is not, I'm not of the mind that anybody can perform either, and I hope this doesn't come off wrong. I do believe anybody can dance, but I think that with the mission that we have, I don't think anybody can dance professionally. And I think I have to be as rigorous about who I bring into the company to represent what we're doing and to do my work as any other choreographer would, so that so that the audience has an experience that is reflective of my work at its core. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We've done a lot of workshops with people of many different disabilities, and in Pittsburgh, I actually had people who were cognitively challenged in a prologue to Gimp. And I had never actually worked with that group before, and it was quite beautiful. So it may change, but right now this is where we are.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I did want to say something, and then we have another question, but while we're bringing them... Thanks. You know, one of the things, like when you talk about, I've always thought about the Holocaust as like this deep misunderstanding, deep fear of the unknown at the root of it. And when we started Gimp, there was a real culture clash. As you can imagine, you know, the dance world, we suffer a lot in some ways. Like if you think about, when you think about it from the outside, if you're in a tech rehearsal for like 12 hours and you're stuck in a theater and you're sitting around doing nothing, and then all of a sudden you got to get up and dance, and you haven't eaten and you're exhausted and you're waiting and you're not getting paid, right? So to people in the disabled member of the company initially had no idea that this was our culture. This was our world. And they found it really disturbing, and it did cause some problems within the group. So there were times when this culture, these two cultures coming together, had a lot to learn from each other, about each other, in order to, it wasn't enough just to dance together and love each other, right? It was also about really
experiencing together the different cultures and the different needs of each person and the different expectations. And that took a lot of time. So by the time Jerron got into the company, I think we'd kind of figured it out, so we were more careful, I think, to explain it to new members, what was expected of them. I just wanted to add that.
Hello. I'm really interested in your style of dance and the people who you choose to be in your company. So my question is, do you have any upcoming shows in New York with your other dancers as well as the ones that we've seen, like any in Manhattan, Queens, Brooklyn, Bronx?
New Jersey.
Jersey.
Okay, so thank you for asking that. We are, and this is a great example of, I think, shifting of perception. My agent years ago, 3 years ago, tried to get Jed Wheeler, who's a wonderful presenter out at Montclair State University. He does really, he takes a lot of risks as a presenter, and he had told my agent that he was interested in what I was doing, but he was not interested in the disability component. But he came to rehearsal, and I showed him it, and I showed him the piece that has disabled performers in it anyway. And then a year later, I didn't hear anything from him. He wrote me an email and said, I have this dancer at Montclair State. He lost his leg to cancer. He's a tap dancer with a peg leg. You must work with him because he will not know the extent of what he can do unless he works with you. And I'm thinking, wow, this is a turnaround. And so I met Evan, and he's fantastic. And then Jed invited us to come to Montclair State University. So we're going to be there in April, the week of April 15th of next year. Not only did he do that, but he offered me this rare opportunity to make a film. Montclair State University got this beautiful Mellon grant, and so that it's about filming dance on location at Montclair State University, and so Jerron is in it, my company's in it, and the film is going to premiere with the live show in April of next year. So that's kind of what we're really working on now. Okay. And then after that, we will be in New York in the fall. But if you go to my website, which is Heidi Latsky Dance, it will have all the information.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi. Again, so my question is like, when you use your example of how you had your two different dancers do, one was doing point and the other one they was watching each other, how do you, like, what is your process of like choosing like the dancers, and like how do you have them, and like I guess the difference of them in the same space to how is your process of like doing that? Because it's very, very interesting, like how she will look at her and she compared herself and vice versa. So how do you have them together, and like how do you bring out their qualities of like, this is what you have, this is what you have, and I like both of your differences of styles.
You want to talk about your experience?
Sure.
I'll talk to him.
Yeah. I'm in a duet with another male and another guy, and he is not disabled. And it was a really interesting thing that Heidi had us do where Greg, his name is Greg, he learned how I did a phrase of movement of Heidi's, how I adapted it. He learned how I adapted it, and we worked together on that. So we move as I move, adapting to Heidi's movement. And so it's a big like cross puzzle, I guess. Now it's interesting because the first year that we were doing it, I was following Greg in a way. Like visually, I was behind him, or I was like, what's the word? Like window. Like there was a window where I was like right behind him, and shadowing. Thank you. Yeah. So it looked like I was always following him, and so something that Heidi did was switch it so that I eventually go into the front and take ownership of that movement. But at least I think in the company in general, there's a thing where there are some who are more knowledgeable based upon their time in dance. And I think Greg, for me at least, when I just came into the company, Greg was a great resource as far as what to do, how to move. So in a way that he's also learning my movement, I'm learning his, I'm learning our other company members, I'm learning Heidi's. There's a lot of interplay with that, and so it's all for one purpose, I think. So it's very interesting how that no one gets left out, and then no one else also gets to feel like the other.
So on that very powerful comment, I think we'll conclude this idea of using dance to encourage interaction among people, encourage us to learn from each other, and also to preclude that othering that you mentioned, I think is a great note for us to end on. So thank you all for being here, and thank you very much to Ron and Heidi for your attention.